Juan stood at the edge of the America's Got Talent stage, a trembling figure under the glaring spotlights. His heart raced in his chest, the thundering sound of his heartbeat nearly drowning out everything else around him. His hands were slick with sweat, and he could feel his throat closing as nerves tried to choke the words from his mouth. This was a moment he had dreamed of, but standing there, so exposed in front of millions, made it feel surreal. He glanced at the judges. Simon Cowell, Heidi Klum, Sofia Vergara, and Howie Mandel, their faces an enigmatic blend of curiosity and skepticism. They had no idea who he was, where he came from, or what it had taken for him to get here. Juan stood on the edge of hope and desperation, a young boy from the slums of Manila, with no fancy clothes or lavish backstory, only a voice and a dream. "Are you nervous?" Simon asked, his tone neutral, but there was an edge of intrigue. Juan nodded, unable to hide his nervousness. "It's okay," Simon continued, his voice softer now. "Everyone is nervous. But tell us your story. We're listening." Juan took a deep breath. His family had always been his biggest support, yet he had never shared the full extent of the struggles they had gone through. "I grew up in a place where poverty is everywhere. My family, we live in a small shack. We don't have much," he said, his voice wavering slightly. His throat tightened again, but he pressed on, his eyes never leaving the judges' faces. "I had to leave school to help my mom sell food on the streets. I don't regret it, but sometimes I wonder what my life would have been if I had stayed in school. If I had a chance to sing without worrying about what we'd eat the next day." There was a moment of silence as the weight of his words hung in the air. The audience in the studio, a room full of strangers, could feel the raw honesty in his voice. Even the judges, who had seen thousands of auditions, were quiet for a moment, digesting the depth of his struggle. Juan continued, his eyes glistening. "But I've always had music. Music is everything for me. It's the only thing that makes me feel like I'm not just another poor boy in the streets. When I sing, I forget all the pain. I forget everything." His story lingered in the room like a heavy fog, and as his words faded, the silence was deafening. The audience and the judges were all processing what they had just heard, and despite the simplicity of his tale, it carried a weight that most couldn't begin to imagine. This wasn't just a boy seeking fame. This was a boy sharing his soul, telling the world that this stage was his chance to make it, not just for him, but for his family, for his future. Then the stage lights dimmed, and the music started, pulling the room from the solemnity of his story into something far more powerful. The familiar tune of an Elvis Presley classic filled the room, and Juan closed his eyes. He stood motionless for a second, letting the music soak into him. This moment, the moment that had taken years of his life to come to, was about to unfold. The nervousness that had gripped him for so long seemed to dissipate as he let the melody wash over him, like a soothing balm. His fingers gripped the microphone, and he began to sing. The sound that came out of him wasn't polished or perfect, but it was real, raw and unapologetic. Every note seemed to come from a deep well of emotion, as if he were pulling from a well of pain and dreams that had been buried deep inside him for years. His voice trembled at first, hesitant as he navigated the highs and lows of the song, but with each passing line, it grew stronger, more assured. The audience was silent now, listening with bated breath. The judges were transfixed. Even Simon, who was known for his tough demeanor, couldn't hide the change in his expression. His usual sternness softened, and a glimmer of surprise flickered in his eyes. Juan's voice was rough but beautiful, the kind of raw talent that spoke of a life lived in hardship, where dreams were not easy to come by. Each note Juan sang seemed to carry with it all the weight of his past and the hope of a future that was just out of reach. As the song built toward its crescendo, Juan's confidence grew. He wasn't just singing anymore, he was telling the world who he was. His voice swelled with emotion, and the power of his performance started to captivate everyone in the room. The audience, once hushed, now erupted into applause. It was as if they could feel the sweat and struggle that had gone into every note, every breath Juan took. The judges exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to astonishment. Heidi's eyes were wide with admiration, Howie looked stunned, and Sofia had both hands pressed to her chest, overcome with emotion. But it was Simon who seemed the most affected. His arms were crossed, his brow furrowed, as if he were struggling to process what was happening in front of him. When Juan finished the song, the room exploded into applause, louder than before. Juan stood there, frozen, blinking back tears. He had done it. He had given everything to that performance, and for a brief moment, he felt like he had truly shared his soul. But now, in the deafening silence that followed, he waited. He waited for the judges to speak. Would they see what he had put into his voice? Would they hear the story behind the notes? Simon was the first to break the silence. He stood up slowly, his face unreadable, and the room quieted. For a moment, Simon said nothing. The tension hung thick in the air as everyone waited for his verdict. He stared at Juan, his gaze intense. And then, finally, Simon spoke. "Juan," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "You have a gift, a real gift. What you just did was extraordinary." His words hung in the air, and a few tears escaped from Juan's eyes, but he didn't try to wipe them away. The other judges were nodding now, clearly moved by Juan's raw talent. But Simon wasn't finished. "You've had a life that most of us can't even imagine," he continued, "and what you did just now, that was you, that was all heart. That's why you're here." The room held its breath again. Then, Simon did something unexpected. He pressed the golden buzzer. In that moment, golden confetti exploded from the ceiling, raining down like a dream come true. Juan stood frozen for a second, his hands covering his mouth in shock. He couldn't believe it. The one thing he had dreamed about, the one thing he had hoped for, had just happened. The confetti fell all around him, covering his head and shoulders, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was more than just a boy from the streets. He was someone special. The audience went wild, applauding, cheering, some even crying. Behind the scenes, Juan's family watched through a live feed. They, too, were in tears as they saw their son, their brother, receiving the recognition they knew he deserved. It was a moment of pure emotion, not just for Juan, but for everyone who had supported him. It was a testament to the power of dreams, to the belief that something beautiful could come from even the harshest circumstances. As Juan stood there, dazed and speechless, Simon walked over to him. He placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice more personal now. "Juan," Simon said, his words gentle but firm, "this is your moment. Take it. You've earned it." Juan nodded, his heart racing, his emotions overwhelming him. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, but it felt so much more real. Now, the stage, the confetti, the judges, the crowd, all of it was a dream come true. And as he stood there, soaking it all in, he realized that this wasn't just a moment of personal triumph. This was the beginning of a new life for him, one that had seemed so out of reach just moments